Salam, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Kashif Sheikh, co-founder and executive director of the Pillars Fund, and I'm really delighted to be your host for tonight's conversation, Why Music Matters, with our incredible guest, Fadia Gader. Today's conversation is the fourth in our second season of the Pillars Pop-Up Conversations, an ongoing series designed to highlight the ways that American Muslims are advancing social change. Every Thursday in October, this October, we are gathering on Facebook Live with Muslim activists, storytellers, story changers, and others to learn more about their work and how we can all collectively create change. Next week on October 29th, Pillars Managing Director Arij Makati will be joined by Latif Nasser, the host of Netflix Connected and co-host of Radiolab for our season finale. We encourage everyone to follow us on social media, tweet using the hashtag Pillars Pop-Ups, and of course, post your comments to the Facebook live stream. We'll try to take some questions at the end, and are just really excited about this conversation. And so, but before we begin, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Pillars Fund, we are a nonprofit organization and grant maker working to amplify the leadership, narrative, and talents of American Muslims in the United States. And we're really proud to have launched a number of different programs, not just our grant making program. Most recently, we announced a partnership with the Blacklist for their first ever Muslim list. The Muslim list will highlight the best unproduced scripts written by Muslim writers, feature films, 1 hour and half hour original pilot submissions will be considered, and scripts from all genre are eligible. So we're doing some really cool stuff and really, really proud and excited to be able to be able to lead some of this work. So with that, I want to introduce tonight's event. This one holds a really special place in my heart because anyone that knows me knows that music is an enormous and important part of my life. It holds a really, really unique power in general, a beat that can transport us back in time, lyrics that can inspire us to take action, and listening together can bring people closer to one another. And the power of music is something that our guest Fadia knows all about. She's been the key part of Music Partnerships team at Instagram since 2017 and has driven important company collaborations with artists and their teams. Her magic touch can be seen with the Versus franchise and trend-setting forecasting artists such as Billie Eilish. Prior to joining the Instagram team, Fadia worked on the Music Partnerships team at Twitter, and is a really well-respected music industry veteran. And she was actually named to Billboard's 2019 40 Under 40 list, the 2019 Alternative Power 100 music list, and most recently, Create and Cultivate's 100 list for the music and the 40 Under 40 Fortune list that came out this year. So she's done some incredible work. I'm so excited about this conversation. And we're going to be talking about what music means to her personally, and how she's harnessed the power of social media to gather people virtually, particularly in recent months. So with that, welcome, Fadia.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Kashif. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah. I'm like, it's really funny because it's fun to do these conversations with people who become your peers, but you're kind of fans of as well. And so like, this has been like a really, really fun experience. And like, I've been following your work and we're very kindred spirits as like we've gotten to know. And so I'm really excited. And but I think the best way to start this conversation, like I read about I read all your accolades and all the amazing stuff that you're doing. But before you were sort of the rock star that you are, you were sort of a young Arab Muslim girl growing up in the American South. What was that like? How did that influence you? And when did you fall in love with music? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Definitely. So I moved to the US officially. I mean, I'd been coming back and forth since 82. We had family here. You can hear me, right?
Just yeah, totally.
Okay, awesome.
Totally.
And in 89, I moved here permanently because of the Gulf War. And music has always been a huge part of my childhood growing up, being that all my siblings are much older than I am. The majority of them were in college in the 80s. So when they would come back to the Middle East, to Kuwait at the time, because our family took refuge in Kuwait after the Palestinian War and the occupation, my mom, like, they would come back with tapes and vinyls, you know, and my mom loved Prince. She loved like Culture Club and, like, you know, all the good 80s music and 90s music. So it was always there, and I was always super into it. When I moved to the US, obviously that passion for music, you know, just kept growing. I got introduced to hip hop. And that was like a catalyst in my life when it came to music, along with like jazz. Like, I'm not one person, like, I'm not the kind of like music lover that's stuck in one genre. I think a lot of us, like foreign kids, tend to be dabblers when it comes to music. Like, as much as I loved hip hop, I was also like a total alternative kid. Like, I was grungy as hell, you know, but I loved like bad 80s love songs at the same time, like yacht rock music. I love yacht rock music. So it's always been a part of my life, but, you know, I mean, it was kind of like shunned upon, you know, who's this Muslim Arab girl? Like, my family, when I said I wanted to work in music, they were like, what do you mean? You're going to work with rappers? And I'm like, it's not just rappers. Like, music is not just rappers, you guys. So, you know, I went into the fashion industry first before I went into music, something a lot of people don't know about me. And that was my gateway into music, because I worked with a lot of artists. I was a fashion stylist for a couple of years. I helped a lot of celebrities open up their own boutiques and clothing lines. And it was kind of a segue into music for me. So that's kind of like how I landed in this space.
Yeah. And so it's really funny because you talked about the influence. Like, I talk a lot about, like, my dad had a really huge influence on me in terms of the music that I grew up listening to. So I grew up, like, Nirvana was like my gateway into getting into, so I'm 37. So like, I think I grew up in like the best era, because it was like, it was like the early 90s when like punk rock broke through with like Green Day, and then like it was right at the tail end of Nirvana. And I always tell the story because I always remember my dad, like, and I feel like I'm this person now where, as I was getting into this music, my dad was like a huge music fan. He was a massive Pink Floyd fan and went to their concerts in the 70s. He actually moved to New York in the late 70s and lived around the corner from CBGB. So he used to go see the Ramones and see the Talking Heads and Blondie. And I remember he was like a very like, kids these days, like, you need to listen to this. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do that because that's lame, because you're lame. And like and it's like, as you get older, you're like, oh my God, that's like the coolest thing. And so when you talk about sort of that type of influence, like, how did, you know, like, I loved hearing the story about your sort of parents being like, what are you going to work with rappers? Like, how did that sort of, like, what type of impact did that have on you in terms of wanting to sort of really pursue this? Like, was there a lot of, like, obviously they probably didn't fully get it, but did that inspire you to sort of really sort of take this path even more seriously? What was that family upbringing like that sort of really helped you kind of decide to do this?
So my family upbringing actually was not really encouraging when it came to my choice of career, I would say, for obvious reasons. I too am in the same like age group as you are. I'm 38 years old. So as you can imagine, growing up in a small town between Murfreesboro, Tennessee and Atlanta, Georgia, the majority of my teenage years were spent in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And my best friend, who's Egyptian, and I were the only two Arab girls in the whole community at the time. So, you know, like we didn't have really a place to fit in necessarily. And here we are, like the only two brown girls outside of like, you know, we didn't even have that huge of like a Hispanic or Latin community. It was either you were super white or super black, and that's it. There was no middle, you know? So we were kind of like dabblers in between on the scene in high school, which allowed us to really, really like be exposed to a lot of beautiful things, you know, across all communities that were in our school. So by the time I got to college, you know, like you're in school, being that I'm Arab and I was living at home, you know, like my family had a lot of say in what I was like, you know, majoring in and doing with my life. So I secretly switched my major to recording industry management because I knew I wanted to be in music. And then I don't remember I'm aging myself, but somehow my brother, who's my guardian, he's much older than me and he's my guardian, he found out and withdrew me out of college. He was like, no, you're going to be a lawyer. You have to he thought I was in pre-law. you know, in poli-sci.
Yeah.
And I didn't feel it. I was like, this is not who I am. This is not what I want to do. So I stayed out of college. I was like, fine, you don't want to support me. It is what it is. And I used to go home to Atlanta every summer because that's where my sister was, who's also my guardian. And one summer when I went there, I just never went back to Tennessee. I was like,
yeah.
You don't want me to study what I want to study. I have a future in music. Like, I really stood my ground. I was 20 years old, and I know it's hard. It's harder said than done.
Yeah.
But I actually did it. I was terrified to do that and stand up to my family because, you know, in our communities, especially as young Muslim women, like, making sure our families are happy with us and accepting who we are as we are is extremely important to us, especially across our cultures. You know, we never want to disappoint our families. But in my heart of hearts, I just knew. I was like, something is brewing. This is like 2002, 2003. There is a social media, like, internet age that's happening.
Yeah.
Something called new media. I was like, I don't want to do traditional marketing. I don't want to go to pre-law. You know, I don't want to do poli-sci. Something is there. So I stood my ground, and it's kind of paid off. And now they love it. Now they're like, when can I get Taylor Swift tickets?
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, now you can like probably like hook them up. So it's not. And it's also interesting. You said something there that I think is so cool and interesting, is that like, and there's a reason why, and this is a different conversation, why I'm convinced, I'm so grateful to grow up in the generation that I did, because we also grew up at this like super interesting time in music, like, right? Like, I grew up in the 90s, like just listening to CDs, and then sort of like that digital boom happened in like the early 2000s, and it changed everything. And I actually,
it was the Napster and LimeWire days.
Yeah, I mean, LimeWire was like college was all LimeWire, and so like I still joke about that with my friends. And I think that like one of the coolest things, and it's really funny because I think about that, and then now I think about like where we are today in 2020, like the last like 8-9 months, which have been completely insane. I don't need to tell anyone that. But like one of the really cool things that's happened is sort of we've come up with new and creative ways to gather virtually. And honestly, you've been sort of like at the helm, like you've been sort of leading some of the like the most exciting gatherings. And I'd love to kind of like talk a little bit about some of the work you've been doing specifically in the last 8 months, some of the collaborations, like the Versus series, like all these different things, and talk a little bit, not just about sort of what you were doing, but sort of like the philosophy behind it, and sort of how you've, you know, the reactions and how it's all been received.
Yeah, let's kick it off. Let's talk about it. What do you want to know? I'm an open book.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's like, you know, what, like, let's start from like what, like, you know, like the pandemic, like quarantine starts in like March-ish. And like everyone is like, holy crap, like life is going to look very different. Right. What does that moment look like for you? Like how do you get to where you are today in terms of all the stuff that you've been doing?
Yeah, so I'm a doomsday prep person. That's just me. Probably watched too many Final Destination movies. I don't know. But some of my friends are living currently in China and Taiwan and South Korea. And obviously I started hearing and seeing, they were posting a lot of stories about what was happening with COVID-19 in Asia. And I just had this gut feeling, like this was about like January. Come middle of February, I told my manager at the time, I was like, listen, I don't know what's happening. I'm a hypochondriac. I have a bad, like my immune system, I just got out of surgery at that point. I was like, I can't compromise myself. I think this thing is going to come to the US. I'm just going to start quarantining at home. I'm going to work from home, you know? And he was like totally fine with it. So this was middle of February. So I had foresight. I was like, this is going to come and it's going to hit us. And I don't think we're prepared with the administration that we have, which has proven, you know, correct.
Yeah.
So come March, when things started going up a little bit, I had the foresight to send a note to some of our top partners. So my role at Instagram is to keep the dots connected between the music industry as a whole and us as a platform. So my role there is to make sure that they're up to the know on, you know, the latest tools, strategies, you know, any updates, announcements, creative strategy and whatnot. So over the years, I've obviously given a bunch of best practices. And one of those things is, hey, you should be utilizing live a little bit more. Live has always been there, but it hasn't been utilized the way it is today, right? So right before we went to quarantine that week prior, I sent a note to our, mailing list, and I was like, hey, just in case we go into quarantine, here's a one sheet on all the best practices for utilizing live. Remember, if we have to quarantine at home, this is the only way you'll be able to connect one-on-one with your audience. And Lord and behold, 10 days later, we go into quarantine, and it started to be the most useful thing that we could have done, is reminding our partners that this is your gateway to a one-to-one or one-to-many interaction with your audience. And it's proven to be extremely helpful.
And what has been like some of your favorite moments in the last couple of months? Like, what have been some of the stuff that you've sort of gotten the most excited about? Because there's been a lot of really cool stuff that you've done. And we talk about it at the Pillars team all the time, like, particularly with some of the Versus series, what's been some of the stuff that you've really sort of just really personally connected with?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we all love Versus just because of the nostalgia. I remember the first time, be it D-Nice or Versus, the first time I was watching them, I think a lot of us were just so scared of the unknown, we were all in silo, alone, fearful at home. And for just a brief moment with both of those franchises, we were able to escape. And because it's older music, because it's more legacy driven, in that moment, it felt like we could just escape to a time when we didn't have to worry about any of this stuff, right? So I think that's why Versus and D-Nice have been so, and many of the other DJs like Ninth Wonder, so many DJs do really cool stuff on the platform. That's why it's been so lovely, because it makes us feel like we're transported. Now, outside of those two big franchises, obviously, I really, really appreciated what Miley Cyrus was doing. She took it upon herself. She was one of the first artists, and actually, let me take it back. John Mayer was the first one over the last 2 years to really see the vision with live. He started his talk show called Current Mood, where every Sunday he helped you get over your Monday scaries or what have you. So, someone like Miley Cyrus, she saw that and has been a fan of what John has done and created her own talk show, where the first time that she sat down and talked to her audience, she brought her therapist, I think, or one of her doctors, because she was like, listen, I have anxiety. Like, I'm sure if I have anxiety, my fans have anxiety too. Can you talk this through? And I really, really loved how a lot of public figures and a lot of artists stepped into, their responsibility to make their fans feel better, to make their fans feel like they're not alone. So everyone from Miley to Tori Kelly to Charlie XCX, I mean, the list goes on and on and on. I think the music industry really stepped up and showed out.
Yeah. And it's been, and you're totally right. And one thing I'd love to talk about in a little bit is around the future of live music and sort of, the Save Our Stages stuff, which has been really cool to sort of see what's happening. But kind of shifting gears a little bit, we are in an election year. I don't know if you've noticed. It's like, it's and one of the things that for me at least, like music is like, it plays such a key role in movement making, inspiring people to stand up and take action, and like a wave of protest music surrounding civil rights movement and the Vietnam War comes to mind. And I feel like we're in this really, really interesting moment in 2020 where everyone is really particularly activated. Where do you see today's music artists and the lyricists taking up the mantle of social justice work today? What does that look like from your perspective? Because it feels like music has always been tied to sort of movements. And I don't think that's new, but 2020 just feels like an explosion of activism and music. And I'd love to hear from your perspective, sort of what you're seeing and how you sort of interpret all of it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing a lot of artists being a little bit more intentional, more considerate of even the content. I was with an executive from a major label the other day, and she was just talking about her artists are really standing up and they don't want to release certain music during a period where they feel like people are either losing their jobs or facing some kind of emotional, stir-ups, and everything is so uncertain that they want to just talk to their audience, So I'm seeing a lot of intention happening in the music industry right now with the majority of artists, honestly. they're taking into consideration where their fan bases are currently, where everybody's mind is. Obviously, we're all focused on this election because who gets in office will dictate what many generations are going to experience to come. So, I think everyone is treading lightly right now. I think a lot of people are in the studio. I mean, I know a lot of people are in the studio. They're definitely creating music and art. I think this has been an opportunity for a lot of artists to create music and art that they haven't been able to kind of tap into in the past. Like I was in a conversation with A-Trak and Diplo and Dylan Francis and all of them recently, not too long ago. And they were talking about like, we're not producing club music right now. Like who's in the clubs?
Yeah.
So Diplo was saying like, you know what? I just put out a lo-fi project. Like I just wanted to do lo-fi, like jammy music. And I just put out a random project out into the universe. And any other time in this world, like I wouldn't have been able to do that because I would have been like completely pigeonholed and being in the club,
Yeah.
So I think it's been a beautiful time for discovery. I think it's also been a challenging time for some artists. I feel really, really bad for emerging artists or newly signed artists because, it's a year lost and a year can make impact, and if you're a struggling artist, especially, or an emerging artist, you just lost a whole year of trying to activate your audience. And you have to get really, really creative in a digital and virtual world to do that.
Yeah, it's actually, I'm really glad that you brought that up because, the support of artists is like a key part of our work at Pillars. Like we have sort of always been, it's sort of been baked into the DNA of this organization. We're all like, very, very sort of keenly aware of the impact that COVID has had on not just music, but just artists in general. And so earlier this year, we launched a fund to support artists who had lost a lot of like revenue and just from gigs and stuff. And so could you talk a little bit more about like, to me, that's a really interesting thread of like, how are artists, particularly the ones that are less known or sort of don't have the security, the financial security, or sort of like their gigs have been canceled, like everything, like how, what type of innovation have you seen? And like, how are they sort of handling it? I know from our perspective, like it was really challenging to see a lot of amazing people kind of just all of a sudden be like, I don't know what the next 6 months. First it was 3 months, then 6 months, and now it's like 12 months. How like what have you seen? I'd love to hear more about that from your perspective from the music industry, because it's a really scary time right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely scary. And at Instagram, we're working really hard to try to bring some kind of level, some kind of features to help artists monetize currently. We just, we're testing right now badges, which is another form of tipping in live. Mm-hmm. We obviously kicked off with donations for nonprofits and organizations, but now we do recognize that there are, struggling emerging artists and businesses and creators and, public figures that have been stripped of their, livelihoods, so to speak. Yeah. I mean, 80% of their income comes from hitting the road and selling merch and stuff. So we're doing our part as far as like creating these tools to help creators on our platform. We're also encouraging our partners to create merch. Obviously, like fans love to be and feel like they're part of the process. I think that's a really big thing as well. We've seen a handful of artists kind of like take up other things. Like a lot of artists, are not just producers and singers and writers, but they're also DJs. So, not to talk about other platforms, but I think Twitch has been great for that for a lot of our partners. A lot of our partners have tapped into their DJ landscape and kind of like tapped into that and doing what they can on other platforms. And we definitely encourage everyone to get it where they can.
And I think it's really interesting too, because I think a lot about if this had happened 20 years ago, like we've come like a long ways from like that early conversation that Lars from Metallica was like suing Napster about sort of, to like now sort of really embracing the internet, although obviously it has had like in a lot of ways a negative impact on musicians. But I do think that it has created more opportunity for people to be innovative and more opportunity. And I really think a lot about I can't imagine what this would have looked like 20 years ago, like without like I think right now you have artists where sort of have a better sense of who their audience is. They're able to engage with their audience sort of more specifically, but there's also just more opportunities for them to kind of get their music out, whether it's sort of, whether it's like impromptu, like I've seen a lot of bands do like live streams, like live performances, things like that. Yeah. People are kind of getting creative. Like, do you think about how do you think about sort of the way that the internet has played a role in not just music, but particularly in this pandemic in the last like 8-9 months? It's been like, what would it look like without the internet right now?
I haven't even thought about it, because I think I tell everyone, they're like, how has the pandemic been for you, Fadia? And I'm like, you know what? It's been such a beautiful, crazy time, because it's been like life altering, but I definitely didn't get the opportunity that some of my peers did to quarantine and chill, so to speak.
Yeah.
So I haven't even had a chance to think about what if this would have happened 20 years ago. It would have been completely different, you guys. Like, it would have been completely, I don't think a lot of people would have survived. I think it would have actually been much worse than what it is now. I think people, it's scary to think about, because, unfortunately, like, this is a hard time for a lot of friends and a lot of creators and a lot of people that are extremely social. I personally have lost a couple of friends to suicide because of it, because the mental strain of what, the pandemic has done to some people. It's forced some people to stay at home by themselves, literally for months on end, with no human touch or contact or anything. And that's really hard on the mental if you're not okay as is. So I can't even imagine if it was like during a period where all we had was our pagers and our home phone. And that's the way we can communicate with one another. But then again, life was so much simpler then. I mean, people say that about, like what happened in the 70s, like they can't imagine what happened in the 50s. And so it's hard to say. Like, I think as a whole, though, humans are resilient and we find a way and we figure out a way. And I think beauty comes from chaos at times. And, we know that to be true when it comes to music. And we see that, so who knows what it would be like without the internet.
Yeah.
But I'm grateful for the internet in this period for sure.
And sort of like on the other end of that, like one of the things that's like really concerned me just as a fan of music and as someone that went to concerts, as someone that really still loves live music, is the future of live music, is like the future. Like, like I almost think about it from the perspective of like, right now it's pretty evident that a lot of amazing people are in the studio. Like, it's really evident that like in the next like 6 months, we're going to get this like boom of like amazing releases, because people are pretty creative. But I guess, like from your vantage point, do you sort of share some of the same concerns about the future of live music? Someone who's sort of in the industry and someone who's seeing it, like, what do you think the future of live music looks like? Because one thing that I've talked with friends about is, I think one of the things that we don't talk enough about with COVID is sort of the idea that it's like, like my wife was literally telling me about like in February, like we live right by the train line. We live in Chicago and we go to work, and she would take the blue line to get to work. And it was like packed, like people were like right up to your face. And you just sort of were like, yeah, that's just life. Like people are just like completely, you're like packed in there. And even when like everything, like one day, inshallah, like is all good, and like where like the vaccine is here and things are good, I don't think that really goes away. I don't envision a time anytime soon where you're going to feel comfortable being in a bus where like, or a train. And then, so what does that mean for live music? Because I think a lot about the shows that I went to and sort of being in close quarters, sweaty, singing. How do you think about the future of live music, just from someone who's in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously myself and hundreds of thousands of artists and music, execs and whatnot, we're all worried about it, because this is not the new normal. This is the next normal. This is what I try to tell all my people, is like, This is our next reality. Like, this isn't just during COVID. You know, our behaviors have forever shifted. So what does this look like? My theory moving into the music space, I mean, it's so crazy because last night I was watching David Letterman's Netflix show and the episode, and I was watching, you know, they had clips of her at like certain festivals and performances. And I'd been to a couple of those festivals. Like, I was actually there at those, and I actually shed a tear. Like, I was like, oh my God, I don't think we're ever going to experience this again. Never like this. We're never going to feel that energy in that capacity with like thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people, right? I do think, however, that in the immediate years to follow, when we get a vaccine and, you know, like, because we went through the Spanish flu, you know, we survived, people adjusted, you know, people weren't gathering for a couple of years. It's going to be the same thing now, you know? But I think in the in-between years until we get back to full capacity and all the things that we used to do probably at some point, my theory is that it's going to be way more intimate shows, way higher ticket prices. That's my theory. Like, you might be able to get a Beyonce show, but that ticket might run you something intense. Like, it's no longer at the Rose Bowl. No way. Yeah. No way they can pull that off, you know, but it might be at the Troubadour, and it might be a $2,000 ticket, you know.
Yeah.
It might be a smaller venue. It might be a drive-through situation. I don't know. It's so hard, and I feel really bad for, you know, anyone that works in the live space. It's hard, man. Like, Live Nation and even like the mom and pop, you know, shops and agencies and bookers and agents. Like, one of my good friends, she's amazing, and like, she doesn't know. She's like, I honestly don't think we're going to come back till 2022.
Yeah.
That's scary to think about.
Yeah, it's really, I think it's scary to think about from sort of the livelihood of so many people who will be impacted. It's also, frankly, selfishly speaking, you know, really challenging for like the sanity for so many of us. Like, the idea of not being able to gather like that, the idea of like music really brings us together in like a really powerful and meaningful way. I think a lot about like a lot of the ways that I related to my parents when they were together. You know, they listened, you know, my parents are from Pakistan, and, you know, they bonded over the music that they listened to. It was like a very much, like, it's a cliche thing to say, but it's like very much a universal language, because the way that we all sort of really kind of got along. But the best stories that my parents have from the early 80s of living in New York when they first got married was like going to like these like Pakistani artists used to come like and do these shows in like New York City, and they used to like all go as a family. And I really do think a lot about the impact it's going to have on so many of us. And I guess on that sort of like, you know, sort of going back to that, you know, do you think that, you know, right now we're sort of in this like really interesting like innovation of kind of like navigating this new reality together and figuring out the ways that we can gather online, and you've obviously been leading that. Are we just at like the, you know, where are we in terms of like, are there going to be even more creative and exciting and interesting ways that artists are going to come? And, you know, are we just at the beginning of this sort of new way of consuming art? Because I'm really fascinated about sort of, I've always been fascinated, not just about the work that Instagram is doing, but just how we gather, you know, virtually. I think a lot of us have like fatigue, obviously, like everyone talks about like not wanting to do Zoom calls and all this different stuff. And in a different world, you and I would be like doing this conversation in like front of an audience, like, you know, in a sort of like a hall in New York or something, or LA. But, you know, how do you think about sort of the ways that the internet, not just in the ways that's been happened over the last couple of months, but sort of the future of the ways that artists we're going to be engaging with art? Like, how do you think about that? Like, what does it look like in 6 months, 12 months?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're just cracking the surface of creativity right now. You know, I think it's been in phases. Like, the first phase, as I mentioned at the beginning of the convo, was like fear and being afraid of like what's to come, the unknown, and then the settling, you know. And now it's like, okay, now I'm like going into the grief and mourning stage of, oh my God, this is going to be our life. And then you just have to come to acceptance. And I think we're almost at that stage where it's like, okay, especially after the election for anyone that's in the United States, I think a lot of big life decisions for a lot of artists are pending based on who's going to be in office as well, you know?
Yeah.
So I think we're almost at the acceptance stage of what it's going to be, also depending on who's in office. So we'll see. It's really hard to tell, but you know, that's the beauty of art and artists. They're creative. They'll find a way, you know, like some stuff that's coming my way of how people want to present their art is really exciting and fascinating. But I think everyone is so preoccupied right now with what's going on in the state of our world.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, if you had told me even in February that sort of artists gathering on Instagram would be sort of the way that we kind of like would bring so much joy to us, like I would have been like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, and like just in February, like, yeah.
Same. And I work there.
Yeah. And I think it's been so amazing to see. So like what, you know, like one thing that's so cool, I'm like very like low key, pretty jealous of your life because I think that you get to do some amazing stuff. Just as like a music fan, I'm like, man, I mean, I heard you like name drop Diplo, like that was really cool. Like it's like a fun thing that you get to do some cool things. What, like in the last couple of months, let's say, or even in the past year, like what's been the thing that has just excited you the most? Like what's the thing that like in this, like, you know, like we're all going through this moment of like somewhat like existential dread or this and that, like what gives you hope, not just in terms of music, or it could be in music, but just what has kind of given you hope in the last couple of months? What sort of kept you excited and somewhat hopeful?
Yeah, I mean, this may be like super technical and maybe not of interest to a lot of people, but what's kept me really hopeful right now is just the work that I'm doing internally, advocating for the music industry and my partners and artists, showing like, look what musicians and artists did. They literally changed the whole ecosystem of how we utilize live as a feature. So how can we show up and show out for them, you know? So that's what gives me hope. That's what wakes me up every day. And I know that sounds really cliche and cheesy, but you know, my responsibility is to the community and to the culture and everything that music does. And, you know, I work in tech. I'm a music exec in tech. And that's really, really hard on its own, because at the end of the day, like when you work at a place like Facebook Inc., you know, the product is the number one priority. So coming in as a music tech, like as a music executive, it's like all you want to do is bang on the door and be like, but music. But you have to find a way to kind of make people care about music without, you know, being a raging bull in a china shop. So that's what wakes me up every day, is that I feel like I have an extreme social responsibility to the community, especially during these times, to make sure that we're implementing certain policies. I'm, you know, vocal about feedback that I get from the community, that I'm constantly, you know, raising the flag when I think we need to work on a certain product that will make the lives easier for our partners. You know, these are the things that make me, you know, hopeful about the future.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more, because I think like we all need to find hope, like, you know, like hope, we have to find it somewhere, because it's been like such an incredibly challenging year. You also said something there that I've always been really curious about. Like, you're a Muslim woman in tech, like in the music industry. Like there's not that many of you, if any. What's that been like? What's been your experience sort of being sort of just like, you know, like we talk a lot about existing in spaces in which a lot of people don't look like us. I mean, frankly, that's been one of the most exciting things for me at Pillars, is to sort of, it's the first time I've worked in an environment, and I had to create the environment, but it was like one of the first times I've sort of been in an environment where I work with people that look like me, that think like me, that sort of have the same sort of shared vision of what we're trying to do. What has been your experience, just sort of being you in a lot of the work that you've been doing, if you don't mind sort of talking a little bit about that?
No, I mean, you know, I am 38 years old. So like there aren't that many women and men in my age group that you know, kind of like went out on a limb and against their family and did what they wanted to do. But I am proud of the younger generation that I am meeting. I'm meeting more and more now.
Yeah.
Especially,
they're pretty amazing, aren't they? Like young people like inspire the hell out of me.
They inspire me. The future is so bright. Like it's so exciting. And it's also at the same time kind of terrifying because I feel like a sense of responsibility. Yeah. And I'm like removing myself because I'm like, well, shit, I don't want to give the wrong advice at the same time. Like I kind of like, I totally bucked the system, you know, and like, you know, I got tattoos on my knuckles. Like, it's just so, like, I don't fit the mold of the Arab Muslim girl at all. But I think, you know, it was hard. It was hard because I didn't have any peers that I could bounce ideas off of. And the few peers that were Muslim or were Middle Eastern or, you know, whatnot, they weren't working in my field.
Yeah.
So nobody really understood, but more and more I'm seeing more people kind of creep in, switch industries completely, you know, in their mid 30s and be like, I've always actually like, yes, I worked in finance, but now I want to work in the music industry in finance, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm seeing a shift. It's exciting because it makes me feel like I'm not alone. And all we can do, hopefully, like I need to do a better job at this, is mentoring younger individuals, especially in the Muslim and Arab communities. It's really, it's been really hard.
Yeah. No, I can certainly understand and empathize with sort of where you're coming from, because I think a lot about the next generation. It's sort of similar. Like they really, really inspire me. And I remember the first time you and I talked, it's like, it's one of the coolest things about Pillars is like, I meet people like you and I'm like, where were you 15 years ago? Like, I was like looking for you. Like I was
like, right there with you trying to figure it out.
Yeah, like it's been like this, like, you know, like it's been this really cool experience in my 30s, like particularly doing Pillars and sort of like engaging with people like yourself and making friends with people who like, I'm like, man, I didn't know you all existed. And for me, it was like particularly important because, you know, because you can relate to this as well, as like that identity, you know, when I was in college, it was really challenging because it's like, I grew up in a pretty white suburb of Ohio. And, you know, when I got to college, I was really trying to connect with my identity, trying to figure out like who I was. Like, it's not a sort of a unique story, but like, I was really trying to find my people, and it took a really, really long time. I did not find them in my 20s. Like it took me a really long time to find people like you. And I'm really grateful that Pillars sort of has allowed me the opportunity to sort of engage and so like I'm just really grateful to you because, and that mentorship piece, I totally hear that too, because I can only imagine that I would imagine that your mentorship services are probably pretty high in demand. And so like, it's probably not easy, but you are so unique and so inspiring. Like I'm 37 and I'm like completely inspired by you and all that you're doing. It's really, really amazing. And so, so like, I think with that, like, I've really enjoyed this conversation a lot. And I wanted to, you know, one of the things that I wanted to do was kind of create some space for people to ask some questions. I guess it's like and sort of see where some, you know, where people's interests are. And I think they're kind of coming to me. And so like, I think the first question, and I'm actually really intrigued by this question for sure, is, how can we best support struggling and emerging artists during this time? Like, I'd actually be curious about that question from two perspectives. Like one, individually, like how do we just, you know, what is it that we can do? And two, like organizationally, when I think about some of the things that we're doing at Pillars, like, how do you, you know, what advice do you have to be able to, for those who just want to help, who just want to support the artists that they love?
Yeah. I mean, I think, in general, the way as a fan you can help, just artists in general is obviously stream their music, buy their merch, you know, tune into what they're talking about. If there's a call to action, engage with it. You know, if they're doing something on platforms like challenges or anything like that, try to get into it. It's no different than activism in a sense right now. Yeah. Like if you don't have money to donate, at least raise awareness. Do what you can because your retweet or your repost or whatever is a form of social currency that can go far and wide. I think people often, just don't really know the power that they have with just like literally reposting a piece of content in support of the artist that they love. So I think that's really important. Now, as executives and leaders in the industry, I think it's really, really important to help build products. Like if you work at a platform, think about the artists, like kind of like how we're doing at Instagram right now. We're building badges, we're, creating better tools for shopping and merch and, all these, the e-commerce side of things. So that's really important as, leaders in our space. I think the other thing is finding out what nonprofits are out there, what organizations are really focused on musicians. Like I always go back to Music Cares, as a Recording Academy member. And the work that Music Cares has done is phenomenal. Like they have supported a lot of people in these times who have lost their jobs in the music industry. So that's the kind of stuff that I would say, like, think about for the most part.
Yeah. And another question that sort of comes to mind as well is, you talked, so openly about sort of your personal story about sort of bucking the trends and doing something you were passionate about, despite sort of a lot of people not fully getting behind it. What advice do you have to people who are sort of in that struggle today, who are wanting to either, whether they're, in college, whether they're in their 30s or their 40s, wherever stage in life they may be, you talk so openly about sort of just some of those struggles. Like, what advice do you have? Like, what have you learned in, as I said earlier, like sort of being sort of a Muslim woman in tech, not just specifically that, but like, how do you sort of talk to people today who are kind of, like, I guess the better way to ask this question is like, what advice do you give like a 22-year-old Radia? Like, what advice do you give?
Boy. That's a heavy one, right? It's so hard because, like, unfortunately in our communities, like our families tend to listen, our families come from a place of love. The fear that they project on us is literally because they are scared for us to fail. And, I don't want to speak for anybody else's family, but for mine in particular, they weren't as kind in their delivery about like why I shouldn't do certain things. It was just like, no, you don't do that. And that's it. No explanation. It's like, but tell me why. So I think having a very, very, like, even though if it's really hard, but having those really, really hard conversations with your family about what their expectations are and really setting like A, boundaries, B, expectations, and just being like, look, mom, dad, I know you want me to be a doctor, but I have to live with that decision for the rest of my life. So how can you, I know you're coming from a place of wanting to see the best and you don't want me to struggle, but if I can promise you that I'm going to do everything that I can to be the best human while doing something I love, will you support me? And I just don't think our families truly love us when it comes down to it. They want to support us and they will find a way to support. It's just going to probably take a couple of hard conversations to get on the same page, which can be difficult. But that's what I would tell myself, not to be so scared at 22, because I was terrified, like even down to, I mean, we're getting a little bit personal, but me getting married, I got married to a non-Muslim, Arab man. He's African-American. He was born Christian, but he converted, because he truly believed in it, not just because of us getting married. But, it took me like until I was 30 years old to feel comfortable having that conversation with my family about a significant other even. Mm-hmm. But had I known how they would have responded to him at 30, I could have had that conversation much, much earlier in my life and probably been, in a whole different position. I'm happy where I am, but it's all about having those hard conversations and being mature about it too, but also backing your shit up.
It's so hard when you're young too, right? I think a lot about the decisions or the things that I did when I was like 22, 23, 24. Mm-hmm. I mean, it really does feel like the world is going to end if things
Right.
don't happen the way, and I appreciate sort of your vulnerability and your honesty in sharing some of that, because I know, like obviously we're talking about like you're talking about your family, my family. We don't mean to project onto this is not a Muslim thing. This is a thing that like we dealt with in our families. A lot of immigrant families, regardless of religion, sort of deal with some of these issues, and I've always appreciated the conversations a lot, because it's like this double edged. It's like both sort of coming from immigrant families, but also being young, and you're just kind of like really scared. Like at least I was like very scared when I was young, and like like if I
Kashyap, I thought they were gonna. I literally thought they were gonna deport me if I said the wrong thing. Like that was my biggest fear, because I didn't become a U.S. citizen until 2009, and I just remember like being like, Fadia, if you do anything wrong, your family's gonna find a way to deport you back to Jordan, and you're never gonna see your friends in the U.S. ever again.
And isn't it crazy to think about, like, because you did, like you said, like our families do love us. If they like heard you say that, they'd be like so devastated. They'd be like that's not, and so it's really interesting. I personally relate to that. I want to get to a few more questions, and there's not like a common thread, so kind of they're a little bit all over the place, but we're having fun and people have a lot of questions, so let's try to see what we can answer. This is a really good one that I struggle with a lot, and I'd love your perspective on is, how do you find balance in your life, or do you find balance in your life when your work is also your passion? Like I definitely struggle with that, because, like my life is pillars. Like a lot of I don't really have like a division between my personal and professional life in a good way, and a lot. And I don't mean to say that in a way that like I'm always working, but just the worlds sort of have collided in a way that like the personal is the professional, and professional is personal. And so my guess is that there's some similarities, as someone who's so passionate about music. How do you sort of balance that? And how do you think about that?
I'm a horrible person to ask that. I don't have a balance.
I say the same thing. People ask me that question. I'm like, wrong person to ask.
And it's not good. I'm not saying that, but it's also not bad. It's just the life that I chose. And I chose to live the kind of life and the career path that has placed me in the eye of the storm, which is my passion. And that's okay. I think it's more so like, it's not so much a balance thing. It's more so like, how do you take care of yourself in this, like how do you carve out time for yourself? And I think that's really important, because when you are actually living your truth and living in your passion and doing the work that just so happens to be your passion, there is no such thing as balance, because you feel a sense of obligation to it all the time. Now, you don't want to get to the point where you start resenting your passion. Sure. Because it's taking over your life. So I think it's just really, it's, subjective to each person. It's a one-by-one like case scenario. But for me, like what balance looks like is also having outside interests outside of music. Like I love cooking. I went to culinary school in 2017 when I first started at Instagram. So a lot of people don't know this. I'm a certified chef. So I graduated in 2018. Nice. But while I was at Instagram, during the weekends, I went to culinary school, because I felt like, okay, at that period, I was like, damn, I really am not motivated by music. Like the music isn't inspiring anymore. I'm not motivated by any of this shit. Like, what am I going to do? I don't want to be one of those execs that's like disgruntled in the music industry and like, Little B, I hate Little B. Like I don't want to be that person. So I was like, okay, well, what else are you passionate about? Okay, culinary arts. You can do what you do in the food world. So I went, but by the time I went and got out of culinary school, I fell in love again with music, Yeah. So I'm grateful for that. But now I know that I have like, plan B and C if I need it. So I think it's really important to just like allow yourself the grace to have outside interests outside of your work life and your passion. Yeah.
Amazing. I relate to that a lot, except I haven't found my culinary school. So like when I find that, I'll definitely let you know what that is. So my last question, who are you listening to right now? Who are you excited about? Like what should, give us some music, Rex.
Lately I've been listening to a lot of Salt. SAULT. I don't know if you guys are familiar with SAULT, but they are this extremely mysterious group. Nobody knows anything about the members. There's no marketing, no branding. I mean, there's no information. There's speculations about who's in the group. And if you're into conspiracy theories, this is right up your alley. But I feel like their music is the soundtrack to the racial uprising that we've all been experiencing in this country. It's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. I can't stress that enough. I also like Faye Webster. She's an artist from Atlanta. She's so dope. I mean, to the point where I almost considered going back into artist management, and I reached out to her. I was like, I will work with you in any capacity you want. But then I came to my senses again. But I love Faye Webster. I mean, there's so many artists that are so great right now that are out and exciting. But I've also been revisiting a lot of catalogs. Again, this is a time for comfort, and it's kind of like comfort food. It's comfort music. So I've been going back and discovering or rediscovering certain catalogs that are really, really important to me.
It's so, yeah, I had a great conversation with the last one I did last season was with the poet and writer Hanif Abdur Raqib. And him and I talked a lot about that, about going back to this has been this moment of kind of going back to that. It's like comfort food. And so I've definitely been revisiting a lot of that early to mid 90s stuff that I was sort of really inspired by. So Fadia, I want to thank you so much. This has been one of the funnest conversations. I love, like I said, this has been one of the coolest. You've been one of the funnest people I've gotten the chance to meet, doing Pillars. And I'm so grateful that you exist. I'm so grateful that you're out there. I'm so inspired by you. You're really incredible. And we're just so grateful to you for taking some time out. I know how busy you are. To have this conversation with us, where we've just been really, really excited about it. So thank you.
It's an honor, and thank you, and to Arij and to Katie as well. I really appreciate the opportunity. Again, it's important to me because there was never an us, Yeah,
I know.
Right. So I do want to make sure that I am a little bit more visible within the Muslim and the Arab communities moving forward. It's really, really important to me, but I'm also trying to navigate those worlds as well and be introduced to everyone, because I'm kind of like the new kid on the block. So this was really important to me. And thank you guys for having me on Pillars, and to everyone watching, taking the time, and stay safe and go vote.
Of course. Yes. Everyone vote. Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us on this edition of the Pillars Pop-Up Conversations. As I said earlier, every Thursday in October at 6 p.m. Eastern, we're gathering on Facebook Live with Muslim activists, storytellers, story changers, and others to learn more about their work and how we can all work to advance needed social change. Tune in next week. It's going to be the season finale called Connected, Bringing Science to the Masses, with the host of Connected on Netflix, Latif Nasser, in conversation with my colleague Arij Makati. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you all for supporting us, and peace.
Bye.